In 2017, Square Enix released a new entry to the Dragon Quest series. The 11th game in the franchise was initially announced for PS4, 3DS, and Nintendo Switch, although it was known as the NX back then. When the Switch version did arrive in 2018, it was marketed as Dragon Quest XI-S, and came with a host of upgrades over the base version of the game. The game's release fell close to the 30th anniversary of the Dragon Quest franchise, so while Dragon Quest XI offered a new story in a new world, certain plot points harken back to the original trilogy, hence its subtitle, Echoes of an Elusive Age. Many people would recommend the game as a paragon of modern RPGs. While I personally wouldn't go that far, I did enjoy the game well enough. If one thing makes Dragon Quest XI stand out, it's the cast of characters. Over the course of the game, the group has great repartee. Each playable character shows a great dedication to the Luminary on his journey to heal the World Tree, and each one has their own unique charm. But for this review, we'll be focusing on the first character the Luminary joins up with, Eric. After all, Dragon Quest Treasures is a spin-off that follows him and his sister prior to the events of Dragon Quest XI. In their younger days, Eric and Mia lived among Vikings with dreams of becoming world-class treasure hunters. One day, the two find an opportune time to sneak off the Viking ship in order to find a treasure of their own. Armed with their trusty catapults, which you might know better as a slingshot depending on your region, the two shove off. It doesn't take long for them to stumble upon a mysterious island. Without hesitation, they investigate a temple within. In its depths reside a pair of dragon daggers and a pair of flying creatures. One resembles a cat and another a pig. Upon grabbing the daggers, Eric and Mia can communicate with these creatures and choose to follow them through a portal leading to a land full of treasure. The two siblings are briefly separated, but after getting acquainted with the land of Draconia, it isn't long before the two find each other again. In the process of reuniting, the two encounter the cast of side characters who will pop up over the course of their journey, and learn about how it is possible to bond with monsters in Draconia to make use of their abilities for traversal and combat. As the pair are reunited, they make their first major find as fledgling treasure hunters. It is none other than one of the legendary Dragon Stones. Our heroes have finally made their big break, is what I would say if the treasure wasn't immediately foisted away from them by a rival gang. Empty-handed but still determined, Eric and Mia trudge on to find an abandoned rail station. By some force of fate, the two are able to restore the train's functions. The train takes them to an abandoned island at the center of Draconia, which Eric and Mia adopt as their base of operations. It is here they meet Sir Euston, who would love nothing more than to see every rail station in Draconia become operational again. Since a fully functioning railway would be helpful to Eric and Mia's exploration, they agree to do what they can. However, their home base also houses a set of ruins named the Snarl. Euston suggests the two venture down and see what they can find. It is here they find a map bearing the Cloud Compass, pointing them towards the 7 Dragon Stones, as well as a tablet detailing the whereabouts of one of them. Thus, after a prolonged prologue, the stage is set for a full-fledged treasure hunt. Dragon Quest XI was originally envisioned as an open-world game, but during development, the team found that the story they wanted to tell didn't lend itself well to that structure. But now, we find ourselves with a spin-off game that doesn't have as much narrative complexity, so it seems the team's original vision finally got to see the light of day. After the prologue, the game completely opens up. You can travel to any region of Draconia to pursue available quest lines. Dragon Quest Treasures essentially turns into Side Quest the game from here on out, so your feelings about the game structure will depend heavily on your proclivity for completing side missions. Talking to characters you've met in each region will open up quest lines, thus populating your overworld map with an abundance of quest markers. My personal approach was to focus on an individual region, and allow quests to accumulate elsewhere before moving into that area and knocking out a bunch at once. Of course, you're free to try out quests in whatever sequence you wish. Once you've set some objectives for yourself, the game gets into its main loop. Before leaving your home base, you may want to equip yourself for the hunt ahead. There are a few facilities that will help you out, though some will need to be unlocked through prerequisite quests. First off, you'll want to decide which of your monster companions will be in your party. Each one has an affinity for different types of treasure, so if you want to boost the value of your vault, it's worth considering how well their affinities match up with each region's treasure forecast. Will you find statues, weapons, jewels, trading cards? You never know for sure, but you can certainly boost your chances. You'll also want to consider each monster's forte. These are abilities that will help you traverse the landscape of Draconia. Depending on where you want to go, some might be outright necessary. But since your party maxes out at 3 monsters, you'll only ever be able to have 3 fortes at a time. At this time, I'd like to rank the usefulness of each forte to help inform your decision making. In C tier, I'm placing Sprint. While researching this topic and scripting this review, I found some sources who think this is the quintessential ability, so you might disagree with me. However, I struggled to find a use for this forte that isn't covered by other abilities. If a monster can sprint, you'll be able to ride it across distances at high speed. It has the longest duration of any forte, so it can help you cover a lot of ground. On top of all this, it can save you from fall damage if you use it before falling from a cliff. It all sounds great, but the entire point of Dragon Quest treasures is to hunt for treasure and materials, and in order to pick them up, you'll have to cancel your sprint. This is also one of 2 fortes that is never required in order to access areas of the map. Frankly, I find it outclassed. In the B tier, I'm placing Scan. If a monster has this forte, all foraging points will be highlighted on your map. You'll even be able to spot them through walls. There's an argument to be made that this ability is wholly unnecessary, since it's not too hard to find foraging points without it. But I did find myself getting some use out of it, unlike the sprint ability, on a few occasions. Some quests have you searching for certain materials, and when I felt stuck on these quests, I would choose a monster with Scan. If I was looking for materials that spawn in bone piles, I could scan the area, and quickly discern which foraging spots were bone piles, so that I could walk past unneeded spots and be more efficient in my item collection. Of course, this was quite situational. In the A tier, I'm placing Stealth. This is the forte I think outclasses the sprint ability. Many of its effects are the same as sprint. You get a boost to movement speed, negate fall damage, and enemy monsters are less likely to catch you in a fight. However, unlike sprint, stealth allows you to squeeze into tight spaces. Sometimes you'll be blocked from making progress on a quest unless you can fit into one of these areas, so keeping a stealth user in the party means that you won't be in danger of missing out and having to return to the area later. Stealth also allows you to forage for items more quickly without halting your movement. The only downside compared to sprint is that its duration is shorter, but subsequently, that means its cooldown is also shorter. In the S tier, we have 2 abilities I never wanted to be without: Bounce and Glide. Bounce allows you to ascend and reach higher ledges, while Glide allows you to fall slowly from high up in order to avoid fall damage, or in order to maintain some height while traveling across high elevation areas. In every region of Draconia, there were many ledges that I wished to climb, and with my slime companion, it was quick and easy to scale cliffs. From high on, if I saw another plateau that grabbed my attention, I'd be able to glide over to it without having to redo the entire bouncing process. Most satisfying of all is how the 2 can be used in tandem. You can initiate a glide from the peak of your bounce, which ensures that you get the most distance out of the glide. Between this pair of abilities and the compact size of stealth, there was no area out of my reach. There is technically one other forte, but I haven't ranked it as it doesn't belong to any monster. It belongs to Eric and Mia, so you always have it equipped. The Fortune Finder ability allows either of the siblings to focus on the presence of treasure. It will point in the direction of a collectible treasure, but if you're in close proximity to the chest, it will instead show you visions of the treasure's exact location through your monster companion's eyes. So a flying monster will give you an aerial view, an armored monster will have its faceplate partially blocking the view, and some monsters may see the world in monochrome, the list goes on. It's a cute touch that not only adds a bit of personality and variety, but also challenges the player a bit more in deciphering the clues. I will say, though, that if you get savvy to the game's treasure spawn points, it becomes easy enough to find treasure without ever using your compass or visions. The game doesn't require you to use them in order for the chest to spawn. Upon plundering a chest, one of your monster companions will be assigned to carry it for the remainder of your excursion. Each monster has a limit to how many chests they can hold. Enemies can make your monsters drop the chests they're carrying. The likeliness of a chest being dropped is based on a monster's safekeeping percentage. Generally, those who can hold more chests are more likely to drop them. It is possible for you to pick up dropped chests as long as you don't perish in combat. But of course, there's another wrinkle to all this. At the beginning of the game, it was established that you'll be dealing with rival treasure hunting groups, like the pirates who stole the first Dragonstone. Well, after a set amount of time with monsters carrying treasure, the game will warn you that a rival gang is on its way. Stay in the area much longer, and they'll catch up to you, initiating a battle. During this battle, if a monster drops a chest, the rival gang will try to steal it. So you'll need to be quick with retrieving it. Of course, you also have to take care not to fall in battle, else all is lost. You might be able to fight off 1 or 2 rival gangs during an excursion, but the longer you stay out, the more will show up. As more gangs chase after you, their level will increase, so you'll run the risk of encountering an enemy that's too tough for your party. The game challenges the player to a balancing act. We want to stay in an area long enough to get some quests done and maximize our treasure haul, but if we stay in one place too long, we may lose that progress to a rival gang. Returning to base will allow you to deposit your on-hand treasure to your vault and reset the cycle of rival gangs chasing after you. There are 3 ways to return to base. First, if you hop on the train at any station you've activated, you can return to base with all treasure free of charge. This is the ideal option to ending an excursion, but if you find yourself in a precarious situation, you have 2 backup options. The next best option is to use an item called a Chimera Wing. These items come in limited supply, but using one will allow you to return to base with all your treasure from anywhere on the map. So, if you don't have enough time or energy to make it back to a rail station, it's not a bad idea to bust one. Alternatively, there is a retreat option. It will take you back to base from anywhere, just like a Chimera Wing, but the major drawback is you'll lose any treasure chests you've acquired. It can still be a better option than letting your party die, especially if you made a bunch of quest progress and haven't saved in a while, but it's definitely your last resort. It's also good for any situation in which you didn't collect treasure but want to return to base. The game makes Chimera Wings inaccessible unless you're carrying a chest anyways, so you won't accidentally spend one. While we're on the subject of keeping your party alive, I should discuss the game's combat system. When it comes to your monster companions, they'll fight automatically depending on what spells and attacks they know. Different monsters specialize in different fields, so as one might expect, you have monsters who serve as healers, mages, tanks, physical attackers, etc. Once your party is selected, you can decide how you want to equip them. The game uses a medal system. Each party member, including Eric and Mia, has slots to which stat-augmenting medals can be placed. Medals vary in rarity, with less common medals giving larger stat boosts. The number of medal slots available will grow as you increase your treasure hunting rank. They can be found in chests in the overworld, or sometimes dropped by defeated monsters. Monsters can alternatively drop materials, which can be pinched from them if you sneak up on them, hold A, and win a timing minigame. While in the field, you can also help your monster's combat capabilities by feeding them. After completing a prerequisite quest, you'll gain access to a kitchen to cook meals, but prepared foods can also be found in the overworld. Press and hold A near a monster companion to bring up the food menu, allowing you to select a dish to serve them. This will give them some benefit which will last a set amount of time. The size of the dish determines how much it fills your monster's stomach, and each monster has a different number of food slots. But larger dishes will have greater effects. Some examples of food benefits include stat boosts and HP regeneration. Beyond equipping meals and medals, your other main means of influencing your monster's combat is with pellets. Your catapult, slingshot, is not just a tool for inflicting chip damage or popping balloons. As you progress in the game, you'll find there's plenty of projectiles to choose from. You can make pellets that will inflict elemental damage to foes, which are good for exploiting weaknesses, restore HP and MP to party members, temporarily boost or lower a stat, or inflict status ailments. During boss battles especially, you'll want to be ready to bring out your pellets. Apart from pellets, your other contribution to combat is the combo attacks you can perform with your dagger. Stand near an enemy and press Y repeatedly to inflict damage. Land enough hits without being interrupted, and you can potentially knock the enemy down, interrupting them. However, if you're being targeted, you may want to use the X button to dodge roll rather than try to keep a combo going. Holding the X button allows you to use MP to heal yourself. As you land hits on the enemy, you'll feel a gauge appearing below your character portrait. This gauge can hold up to 3 charges, and each charge enables you to unleash the dragon. While holding R, press a face button corresponding to a party member to have them unleash an ultimate attack. This is where the largest damage output comes from, so I would always try to save these attacks for higher leveled enemies, rival gangs, or bosses. Holding R and pressing the B button will activate Eric or Mia's own ultimate move, the Wild Side ability. While the character is showing their wild side, their damage from each dagger slash is increased, their speed is increased, and critical hits become much more frequent. This is a good way to bring down a much higher leveled enemy, or drain a boss's health when their weak point is exposed. The last button you might wish to know about is the D-pad. By pressing up or down on the D-pad, you can issue simple orders to your monsters, either charge into battle or regroup around your location respectively. I've told you a lot about combat here in this review, but the game does the bare minimum in telling you about many of these mechanics. I did not know about the existence of dragon attacks, wild side, healing myself with MP, or issuing orders to the party until I either stumbled upon a loading screen tip, or had a training side quest asking me to do it, prompting me to look it up online. I think the game is better for having these mechanics, but the fact that I didn't get exposed to them during the 2-hour prologue makes me question the pacing. I'd say to be prepared to read through the menus if you want to fully understand the game, but I'm hoping my breakdown in this review offers the insight you might need. I've established that you'll have monster companions and detailed all the ways in which you'll interact with them, but that begs the question about how you go befriending monsters in the first place. As it happens, any monster you defeat has a random chance of showing up at your base's recruitment office. This chance can be increased by hitting them with an additional type of pellet called the Buddy Bullet. If a monster appears in the recruitment office, you can view information on their stats, fortes, and attacks. To cement the deal, you must be able to reimburse your monster with a fee consisting of materials. Once all that is squared away, the monster is yours as long as you don't choose to dismiss them. For as long as you keep a monster employed, you can find some of them hanging around at your base camp. In a nice attention to detail, some behave in special ways that reflect their nature. For example, when you fight a metal slime, they always try to run away. So in the same vein, if you have one in your base, it flees from you every time you approach it. In between your excursions to different regions of Draconia, there are a few things you may want to check on at your base. Shopping for supplies, cooking meals, and crafting pellets are some services I've already mentioned, but there is a bit more to go over. First off, the vault. When you arrive back at base with treasure on hand, the game will automatically have it appraised. The total value is added to your vault. As this value increases, you'll earn different passive benefits, like more metal slots, lower forte cooldown time, plus more of the main quest line for the Dragon Stones will open up. The treasures you find are all references to past Dragon Quest titles, things like statues of characters, trading cards with story illustrations, pieces of equipment, and so on. The celebratory aspect of the game's treasures feels a bit redundant after all that Dragon Quest XI did to celebrate the series' roots, but it does make more sense in the context of this spin-off. It just makes me hope that Dragon Quest XII, or any other spin-off that comes before it, doesn't use the series' legacy as a crutch. Over the course of the game, you're sure to have many monsters knocking down the doors of the recruitment office to join the hunt. But what becomes of the ones who can't tag along with you directly? Fortunately, instead of idling around the base, they can be put to use elsewhere. Speak to a certain NPC at base in order to send monsters in waiting out on dispatch missions. After some amount of real time, they'll return with materials and possibly treasure. This also serves to boost their levels, so if you wish to rotate monsters out of your party, as long as you've been putting them to work, their level will remain on par with your existing party. Dispatch missions will also serve as the game's in-universe explanation for what one sibling is doing while you're playing as the other. Earlier in the review, I mentioned a temple that Eric and Mia visit at the beginning of the game. To venture deeper inside this temple, the player must switch between them in order to keep pairs of pressure panels held down. With this introductory puzzle, the game sets the stage for a treasure hunting adventure full of tribulations in tandem. But in the hindsight of writing this review after finishing the game, I realized the teamwork was a one and done experience. The rest of the game sees you playing as one sibling at a time, and you're never required to switch between them if you just prefer one over the other. The two are functionally the same. Dispatch missions are not the only types of quests accessible from your base. The game also has a set of daily missions which refresh in real time. At first, I only bothered with these missions if they happened to be in the vicinity of other quest objectives, but one day I ended up completing all of them. It was then that I realized how much I'd missed out on. As a reward for completing all daily objectives, the game gives you 2 Chimera Wings. Yes, the magic item that comes in otherwise limited quantities and allows you to return to base with all treasure in the blink of an eye, and this is on top of the materials you earn as rewards from the individual daily quests. From that point on, I went out of my way to finish these quests for the rest of my playthrough. It radically changed how I played the game, since now I had a good stock of Chimera Wings, making them more expendable. There is one final place of note at your base camp. In fact, I mentioned it at the end of the prologue. The Snarl is a set of ruins that you'll slowly uncover over the course of the game. At first, the crew simply finds a clue as to one Dragonstone's whereabouts, but as you venture deeper, you'll find a few more things of note. If you check treasure chests, you'll find Sanguinite, a limited resource essential to restoring functions to each of the rail stations. But the more obvious feature is the giant blue swirly vortex in the center of some rooms. These are called teleportals. Each one leads to a dungeon. Defeat all enemies on each floor to progress to the next. Some have bosses waiting for you on the final level. Eventually, you'll be able to find some of these portals in the overworld as well, where they function precisely the same way. For finishing a dungeon in the Snarl, you receive directions on how to advance the main quest line. So if your objective is just completing the main story, you'll have to take these on eventually. Each one in the Snarl has a recommended level to let you know how tough it will be. Having tackled each one at the recommended level, I didn't find any of them to be too challenging, but if you want a slightly easier time than me, it's worth checking your pellet supply and cooking some meals before going in. Oddly, when a teleportal appears outside the Snarl, it won't recommend a level at all. And in those cases, you're stuck finding out how tough the enemies inside are by venturing in. But just like the rest of the overworld, the options to retreat or use a Chimera Wing will get you out of harm's way. So, in total, the main gameplay loop is thus. Equip yourself at base. Set out to complete quests and find chests. Stave off enemies until your run is complete, and make your way back to base before circumstances lead to your untimely demise. If you just want to focus on the main story, find enough treasure to increase your gang's renown, complete dungeons in the Snarl, and complete the quest to retrieve the 7 Dragonstones. But I can't say I would recommend the game to anyone who wouldn't at least dabble in some of its side quests. If you've seen Dragon Quest XI, you'll already be familiar with Dragon Quest Treasure's visual style. It's devoid of texture in places, but it's completely serviceable. I've noticed the game's performance has not been an issue while playing. Objects in motion will continue running without a hitch even from far away. The game also does not suffer from the sort of pop-in you might find in other open-world games trying to run on Nintendo Switch. Though, to reiterate, I think much of this is directly related to the choice of a simpler art style. I'd ultimately say the choice was worthwhile, since I ended up spending a good chunk of time wandering the world, and I was pleased not to encounter any hitches. Despite its simplicity, the game does throw in a handful of memorable locales, like how, for some reason, there's a giant cactus in every region, not just the desert area. The world of Draconia is built on the backs of 2 titans, not to be mistaken for those found in Xenoblade Chronicles. As one would infer from the name, the 2 titans were dragons. The regions consist of parts of their bodies that drifted apart into floating islands. This means as you explore, you're bound to find their bones serving as monuments. There's certainly some charm in the fact that you can walk along a giant rib cage, or find yourself looking out at the horizon through the gaping maw of a skull. As you travel the world, you'll find yourself caught up in the music. That is, if you don't mind hearing the same recycled Sugiyama compositions for the umpteenth time. Each region reuses an overworld theme from a previous Dragon Quest game. And as usual, these are not rearranged or re-recorded. I have no qualms with the compositions themselves. I think plenty of them do a good job of setting the tone for adventure in their original games, and plenty stand the test of time. It's just a shame that while the team was able to be ambitious with an open world, they didn't have a chance to be ambitious with the soundtrack. If you've heard these tracks before, you are missing nothing by playing the game with your own music in your headphones. On the subject of sound, I will now voice my final gripe with the game. If you've had any exposure to the Xenoblade Chronicles games, you'll know a common complaint is that you'll hear the many voice lines on repeat. I managed to enjoy those games in spite of this, but I will acknowledge that it can get grating. That said, I think not only does Dragon Quest Treasures have the same problem, but that it's worse than it is in Xenoblade. The annoyance induced by the repeated lines is exacerbated by the direction of the monsters' voices. Many are made to sound quirky, whether it's the high pitch of a slime or the throaty delivery of a condor. And they don't just talk in battle. Whenever there's treasure nearby, whenever you use a forte, or just whenever, they keep speaking the same lines on repeat. Eventually I hit a point in my playthrough where I opted to turn down the voice volume from the options menu. This alleviated the issue, though of course that means I didn't hear any voice lines from Eric, Mia, or other such characters. At least there's not many of those outside of cutscenes, so it wasn't a huge loss.
Here we go! What slime is it? I have a dark secret. What a beautiful place! Now, where could that be? What slime is it? Rather be kept in the dark. I'd rather be kept in the...
I'm jelly happy to get that off my chest. I can only give Dragon Quest Treasures a full recommendation if you're a long-time Dragon Quest fan who wants to see the fan service in the form of treasures, because unless you find yourself getting caught up in the charm of Draconia, the game can be a bit of a grind with its repetitive combat. I had checked it out for myself because I enjoyed Eric in Dragon Quest XI, but playing the full product, I can't say that was a good enough reason on its own. Fortunately, I still had a fun time with the spin-off, as I've always been fond of games in which you're tasked with finding hidden goodies. I can't say I was enthralled enough to collect a full 100% of the treasures, but the hide-and-seek formula can be good fun, so perhaps if you have that same inclination, you might still have a positive experience with the game. And if nothing else, the game has Isabella, the best girl of 2022. Don't we all need some of that pink, gelatinous curve in our life? Frankly, you should ignore this entire review and buy the game just for her.